Thank you for all your comments this afternoon. I will try and get to as many of your reactions before 6. But what do you make of it? 21% increase in council tax over 2 years. That's the main headline from those proposals. Let's speak to Dr. James Brackley now, who's from the think tank Audit Reform Lab. He's been up from last night to the early hours of this morning looking through the 300-page document. Dr. James is with me now. Afternoon to you, Dr. James. First of all, you're looking great on no sleep. Come a bit closer for me.
Thank you.
I can't see the bags under the eyes. But look, on a serious note, this is shocking news, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the scale of the cuts is unprecedented, and we've had this detailed breakdown now. It's devastating, particularly for the services, and I've got to say the statutory services, particularly families and children's services.
I mean, if people are thinking, what's the Audit Reform Lab, just explain what you do.
So we look at audit reform across the country. There's been, in lots of different sectors of the economy, there's been issues with the external audit market. In local government, for example, we abolished the Audit Commission in 2015. And we've got a huge backlog of audit now across the sector, financial information not being properly verified. And we look similarly at the energy market and other use of public money. And how that's being kind of audited.
So within these 300 pages, what was the main findings from you? Why have Birmingham City Council come to the conclusion that their residents have to pay 21% of council tax?
So a lot of this comes back to the so-called financial support package that's been imposed by Michael Gove's department and the kind of strings that have come attached to that. So that's forcing through short-term cuts come what may in terms of very little consideration of financial sustainability or value for money. And they're also insisting on these mass asset sales of £500 million, which again is attached to that support package. So that's kind of the background as to why it's happening. But big problems with the proposals as well when you get into the detail. What
the problems that you see?
So we see what we call a cost spiral, essentially. So because there's this short-term focus, we're seeing, cuts to things like families and children's services, which we know is driving a big increase in temporary accommodation costs. We're seeing only in 2018, the Birmingham Children's Trust was established because of major failings in children's services. And part of the statutory recommendations there was a £6 million investment. The proposals yesterday were cutting £9 million from the Children's Fund budget.
But, in defence to the council, they have to raise this, money to pay back, this huge amount of equal pay claims, quite rightly some may argue. So they've got to do something drastic. So perhaps this is the drastic.
I think the equal pay claims is actually somewhat peripheral in terms of the immediate financial crisis that the council's in. That was what triggered the Section 114. It looks like the failure of the Oracle IT system is actually much bigger in terms of there's a £60 million overspend on the Oracle and £68 million of savings couldn't be delivered. And again, a lot of that was linked to the Oracle IT system. So I accept that there are problems, but if you're we're looking at a £1 million cut to neighbourhood advisory service. Half of the staff are being cut from that team. That generates £15 million for the council. The council spends over £10 million defending disability tribunal claims, and we're cutting disability services.
So basically, it's kind of like you're saying we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but we haven't even got the funds to pay Paul.
Well, it's precisely because of the way it's been structured through the financial support package. All of the emphasis is on short-term cuts. There's no value for money assessment. There's no long-term view. And a lot of this information has not been properly audited or verified as well. You mentioned the equal pay liability. That hasn't been audited, and we have very little information on how much that will actually be. Still putting the cart before the horse in many respects.
Okay, well, according to, your people, the lab audit, they say we put audit failure under the microscope. So who's failed here?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think there's various respects to it. So we've got to step back and say, there's been a decade of austerity. Birmingham has lost more than £1 billion in its revenue, and they've, for a number of years, consistently struggled to deliver savings. So that has consistently weakened the council's finances, and that's a similar position to authorities across the sector, particularly
Dudley, Coventry. Yeah. They're all hitting the wall.
Absolutely.
So has the local council's structure, is it outdated? Should we just be looking at a whole new model?
I think there's certainly major governance issues for us. So audit committees don't have the resources to properly scrutinise senior officers or the external auditors. There's a big failure in the external audit market. We've not had an audited set of accounts since 2020 for Birmingham.
Well, hold on a minute. You saying that? Surely that should be massive warning signs. Are you saying that that Birmingham Council, or indeed any council, is above an audit?
Well, it's certainly...
Is that what we're saying?
Effectively, it's reaching that point, because if the external auditors are taking 3-4 years to sign off a set of accounts, it becomes a meaningless exercise. We need them to blow the whistle when things are going wrong. So the auditors didn't blow the whistle when it came to equal pay. They didn't spot that issue here at Birmingham.
So are they up for being held responsible? I mean, someone's got to be accountable.
Yeah, I mean, again, in terms of governance and reform, the government abolished the Audit Commission in 2015, and retrospectively that looks to have been a very bad decision. The Audit Commission were quite good at value for money audit, and they were quite good at supporting local authorities. That was all privatised. We have Grant Thornton now as the auditors for Birmingham City Council, taking £1 million audit fee, by the way, and that work is now desperately behind where it should be.
But who signs that off? Who signs that off that he gets £1 million to do this? Who signs that off?
Well, ultimately, I think that's the council and the cabinet sign that off in terms of the work, but it's really a systemic problem in terms of the audit and governance structure of local authorities nationally, I would say, on that point.
But if we were running a business, James, you and I, we're running a business, our books are sort of looking a bit, sort of all over the place, we're going to get into trouble. We're going to get fined. We're going to get potentially shut down. Why isn't that happening for councils?
Well, I'll give you an indicator. So I mentioned the Oracle IT disaster. A report recently from the external auditors identified that there are over 70,000 transaction errors between the council's cash position and their bank accounts and their accounting records. We still don't know what the financial position is for 23-24 or even for 22-23 either. So again, it comes back to the fact that the financial support package is insisting that all of these cuts are front-loaded before we know what the equal pay liability is, before we know what the financial position is, and before any value for money work has been done. So again, I think it all feels a little bit scorched earth. There's no long-term plan. There's no longer view in any of this. So we're just urging the commissioners, and particularly the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, to step back and to support the council in having that longer view, I would say.
But is anyone listening to you?
I think so, increasingly. I mean, there's more and more attention being paid to this. It is a crisis point. This document's being put to Cabinet on the 27th of February. It's potentially going to be voted through on the 5th of March. So the first tranche, the first half, the 150 million cuts is coming very, very soon. But then there's another 150 for the second year as well. We've got a bit more lead time, perhaps, in that regard. But it really is at crisis point now.
You're like I say, you're from the think tank Audit Reform Lab. Have you ever known anything like this, James?
Not in local authority, and I'm struggling to think anywhere. I mean, the scale of the audit failure, I would suggest, is on a par with the likes of Carillion and some of the big audit scandals we've seen in the private sector. We've got... certainly the backlog of outstanding audits is almost unprecedented. We don't really see that in any other sector of the economy besides local government. So something is clearly going very wrong with how this financial information is put together and assessed.
If you had the power, which we know none of us do at the moment, what would you do? Would you call for a complete restructuring of local council funding and auditing? Or would you say, actually, we know we have to work with the existing model and we just need to try and work out where things are going wrong?
So I would say in many respects there's lots of the existing model that we can work with, but there absolutely needs to be a new funding model nationally for local government. There's an estimate that there's something like a £4 billion shortfall in the funding for local government. Absolutely, the external audit model needs to be reformed. We think audit committees need to be strengthened and bolstered to have more powers and more resources to hold officers to account.
Yeah, James has just been in touch. Another James, not your namesake. Hello. Birmingham Council issues just highlight the shortfall given to them by government. Even those not in debt are struggling. Too many government and council departments have been privatised. This means costs go up, not down, as they should. Finally, what would you make of that?
Yeah, so I think this touches on several important points. Like, there has been a lot of privatisation and outsourcing over the last decade. There's been a lot of short-termism over the last decade, and that's what drives a lot of our concerns about this budget, is our experience of how austerity has played out over the last decade and the consequences, the business continuity issues. I mean, a lot of the Oracle issues stem back from budget cuts
system,
in 2019. So yeah, Oracle is the computer system. We cut £1.7 million from the Oracle implementation scheme. We removed 40 posts, and now we've got a £60 million overspend, and the external auditors saying that team is understaffed, and we see a lot of that in the proposals that were announced yesterday.
Dr. James Brackley, thank you very much for coming in from the think tank Audit Reform Lab. Go and get some sleep now, James.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go and get some sleep. Bless you.